Hi everybody, my name is Pat Hogarty and welcome back to California Real Estate Principles, Real Estate 300. This happens to be show number 15. And today we're going to continue on with our discussion of contracts. The last time we spent quite a bit of time talking about what a contract was, defining what it was. We talked about who can enter into a contract. For example, you have to be a certain age, such as 18 years of age. We talked about the different types of people that maybe cannot contract. For example, if they're incapacitated due to some sort of mental problem that they may have, or they're incarcerated, they can't actually enter into a contract without special permission. So we covered all of that, different kinds of items. The last thing that I said that we would pick up with the next time that we met was talking a little bit about the statute of frauds. And all I want to do is I'm going to be pointing out on the page where this happens to be located, just to let you know, and what it's really doing is talking about why we have to have things in writing. So for example, right here in the statute of frauds, it says most contracts which by the statute are required to be in writing are found under the statute of frauds. The statute of frauds was first adopted in England in 1677 and became part of the English common law. And again, that's the reason where we get a lot of our laws from. You know, we get them from the countries in which the people originally came from. Subsequently, it was introduced into this country and has become a part of California law. The main purpose of the law is to prevent forgery, perjury, and dishonest conduct by unscrupulous people, thus improving the existence in terms of certain important types of contracts. And so from there, it gives you a list of the types of contracts that would fall underneath this scope. Number one, or it says the statute provides that certain contracts are invalid unless those contracts are in writing and signed by either the parties to be charged or their agents. Under California Civil Code, the following contracts must be in writing. Number one, if you have an agreement where the terms will not be performed within 1 year following the making of the contract, it has to be in writing. So if I negotiate something today that's not going to take place for maybe more than a year later from the day that I signed it, it has to be in writing, period. Number two, a special promise to answer for the debt, default, or non-performance of another has to be in writing. So when you say that you're going to take care of someone else's debt, that has to be in writing. Number three, an agreement made upon the consideration of marriage other than mutual promise to marry. Okay, so this would be something where it says agreement made upon the consideration of marriage other than mutual promise to marriage. I would have to say this would be something like a prenuptial agreement of some sort. You know, and apparently today, on the Today Show this morning, they were saying that these are becoming much more popular. So I don't know. Again, the reason why you would do that is because you know, a couple would get married and then decide that they were upset with each other, and now you know, the people want to protect the assets that they have. Like, hey, you know, I've only been married for a year, and you can't take half my property away. So they have a prenuptial agreement to prevent that. Number four, an agreement for the leasing of real property for a period longer than 1 year. So if it's less than 1 year, it's not required. More than 1 year, you have to have it in writing. Or for the sale of real property or the interest therein. It also applies to any agreement authorizing an agent to perform the above acts. So in other words, listing agreements, trying to find people to list to rent your building or rent your house, that has to be in writing. Next thing, an agreement authorizing or employing an agent, broker, or other person to purchase, sell, or lease real estate for more than 1 year. It is also an agreement to find a buyer, seller, lessee, so on and so forth. So you have to have that in writing. Next one, an agreement by which its terms is, an agreement which by its terms is not to be performed during the lifetime of the promisor. An agreement that devises or bequeaths any property or makes provision for any person by will. So we're talking about things like a will, where you say, after I'm dead, I want my property to pass to my son, to my daughter, to my wife, what have you. Okay, needs to be in writing. And if you remember from Chapter 1, that either has to be holiographic, which means in your own handwriting, or it has to be something that's typed and witnessed. Okay. An agreement by a purchaser of real property to pay the debt secured by a trust deed or a mortgage upon the property purchased, unless the assumption of that debt by the purchaser is specifically provided for in the conveyance of such property. So we're saying here an agreement by the purchaser of real estate to pay a debt secured by a trust deed or a mortgage upon the property purchase. So in other words, we're talking about you're going to pay that debt when you purchase the property, okay? That's what we're talking about there. So anyway, that gives you a rough idea of why things have to be in writing. It's covered under the statute of frauds. Again, the whole purpose of that is to make darn sure that, if something comes up and somebody, later on in a transaction, somebody says, well, I didn't say that. That's not what I said. I didn't agree to that. You just go out, you pull out the old contract, and you say, wait a minute, paragraph 4 said this. You signed this down the bottom. In fact, some people will say, I know I signed it, but I didn't understand it. Well, I'm sorry. You need to sign it and understand it. And the judge will just sit there and say, well, you signed it. So that's why it's important for clients to actually read these documents to make sure they understand them, and why you as an agent are supposed to be helping the client understand and help clarify whatever the issue is that they don't understand. Now, the next thing that we want to talk about after that is, if I can find the right diagram here, is to talk about discharge of the contract. Discharge of the contract means, the actual steps of completing what you originally agreed to. So a discharge of a contract in its most simplest form would be, for example, if I had agreed to paint your house, and I went ahead and we agreed to a certain amount of money. I said, I'll paint the outside of your house for $2,000, which is a cheap job. And if I go ahead and paint the house, and you pay me, we have fulfilled the contract. When we get all done, you may go, hey, you did a great job. I really love the work that you do. Here's your check. Would you like some coffee and donuts to go with that? I mean, you're really happy. Full performance, everybody is happy. That's one way that we discharge the contract. After that, it's over. Okay? The next way that we can discharge it is something by what we call substantial performance. In other words, maybe I have done that paint job on your house, and I've really done a nice job, and we got all done with it. We noticed that I missed a little piece of trim, or I missed some small little part. Nothing substantial, it's nothing major, but something that's minor. We may very well have an agreement that you may say, don't worry about it, I'll take care of it myself, or I'll have a friend of mine take care of it. Or if maybe I'm out of town, I may even say, you know what, I have a friend of mine that'll come over and take care of it. I'll pay him $50 and he'll paint that little bit for you. Okay, but substantial performance, okay? Something extremely minor. The next thing would be something called partial performance. Partial performance would be where maybe I'm doing something and I cannot complete it for whatever reason. Maybe I have agreed to, I'm just trying to think of something now. Maybe I've agreed to do, for example, I had a house that I sold in which I was having work done by a termite company. And the termite company did all the work that needed to be done. They had done work on the deck. They had done quite a bit of work around the house. And there was one thing when it got to a thing we call a barge rafter, which is a rafter. It's the big rafter up near the roof. And it had some dry rot in there. And they had originally agreed and said, you know what, I'll take care of that. Don't worry about it. Well, when the day came that the guy had to actually get up on the ladder, you could see his legs start to shake. And when he quickly realized that the roof was a lot higher than he thought, and the angle of the ladder was at such a place that he was really nervous about getting up there. And what he basically said is, you know what, I've determined, I know I contracted with you to do that, but I think maybe I have to hire somebody, or we need to hire somebody else that can do that has more experience. And so consequently what we did is we came to an agreement, and I paid him for the work that he did, and then I went and hired a roofing person that did that. Also found out at the same time that roofing people get nervous when they get up on certain kinds of ladders, especially if they're at a high angle and there's a chance that they may fall. They really get nervous about it. But anyway, that's how we took care of that. So that would be a partial performance. And possibility to perform would be, in this particular case, it would be, and I think, I'm not sure whether in this book, but in other books they use, is where something has happened. For example, maybe the house I've agreed to, maybe I own a house that's up in Lake Tahoe, something that's out of the area that I don't see every day. Maybe it's a cabin that I have, and I hire somebody to do the work. And what ends up happening is that they agree to do it. I agree to give them some money to get started, to maybe buy the paint. In the meantime, something happens to the cabin. It burns down. Now that the cabin is burned down, or maybe it got blown away in a storm, it's impossible to perform that paint job because the place no longer exists. So that would be an example of where it's impossible to perform. Then on this side here you have, once we've breached the contract, breach means that we're not fulfilling the obligations, we have several different things that we can take a look at. Number one, we can just accept the breach. We can say, you know what, for whatever reason, I can understand that, it could be as simple as the fact of saying, this is beyond that person's ability to do the job, and I accept that they can't do the job. It could be the fact that, in a case of a real estate contract, it could be where maybe you agree to sell a house to somebody and they can't buy it, and maybe you say, okay, well, you know what, if you can't buy it, it's maybe the best thing for me to do is accept that you can't perform that, and what we're going to do is I'll go ahead, and maybe in some cases you may return their deposit and turn around and say, I'll just put it back out on the market again, okay? Another thing that you may have is where something may become, the discharge of the contract is going to be where there's some kind of an operation of law where basically the contract or parts of the contract have become illegal and you can't do it, and there's a decision by law that you're not allowed to do it anymore. And the final one is called just an agreement between the parties. And an agreement between the parties is to say, you know what, I think what we ought to do is that it's not working well, let's just go ahead and discharge or end the agreement. And you both agree to that, and that's it. You're done. Okay? So anyway, that's talking about the discharge of the contract. What I would like to do, because there's an awful lot of material in this chapter, is that I would like to move on to talking about the actual purchase agreement, if you will. They do talk for a while in here, before we go any further, about how remedies you can have for the breach. Just talking about how you can handle it. If you do have to have a remedy, you can do something like just accept it, okay, and move on with your life, if you will. You can have a unilateral decision where you just decide on your own to rescind the contract. You can have an action for dollars, in other words, where they agree that, hey, you know what, you can go ahead and, since you can't do that, I want you to, for example, pay me a certain amount of money, and that'll take care of it, okay? So, for example, I may have where maybe I've told somebody they can go ahead in and they can maybe move into a house early, and that's been part of the agreement. We found out there's something that's preventing them from moving in, something that's my fault. I didn't know at the time that maybe there was a leak in the roof or there was some problem, and I may very well say, you know what I'll do is for 2 weeks. I'll go ahead and put you up or rent you a house or put you up in a motel or a hotel or something. In other words, some kind of action for dollars to help remedy the situation. And the final thing is where you can have a possible specific performance. Specific performance is where I'm going to maybe force the people to fulfill the contract. And as the book talks about, a lot of times that, when you have somebody that maybe is not going to sell the house for whatever reason, that the courts, at least that's what they talk about, the courts are not inclined to necessarily force somebody to sell. So you may end up where, could they force you to sell the house or could they force you to buy the house? Well, they could, but they may very well have you just pay some kind of damages to whoever the party that was affected and then again move on. Okay, so if you've promised to buy the house and you haven't been able to buy it, and the sellers fulfill all their obligations, and maybe the reason why you can't buy it is because the boss is telling you that you're not going to really be moving to town. Maybe the remedy for that is that you're going to pay the owner a month's or 2 months worth of their monthly payment, something like that, to help liquidate or fix the problem, if you will. Okay, anyway. What we want to talk about now is the actual purchase offer. And there is a lot to this specific contract. What happens is that when a house is listed for sale and it's shown by, a number of real estate agents, and then hopefully somewhere along the line one of those real estate agents happens to have a client that is interested in buying the house. And what they end up doing is they end up making a purchase offer. And so what I want to do is go through some of the things that are in the purchase offer so that you're familiar with it. Again, this is something that trying to blow this up so that you can see it on the TV is a little bit difficult, so I'll walk through some of it so I can kind of talk you through it. First thing I want you to notice is up at the top of this, as I've normally mentioned, that, and I'll blow this up for a minute, I want to talk about this area right here. You'll notice that this form is a form that is created by and maintained and checked all the time by the California Association of Realtors. So it's very, very important that you're using some forms that are correct, that reflect the current law, and that's part of what the California Association does, as I mentioned with other contracts. They do everything in their power to make sure that they've included all the current laws that are necessary. The other thing that they do too is that they find out if for some reason there are certain things that continuously come up on a regular basis, and people are having to do things like handwrite them in all the time. Normally what will happen is through their investigation they'll find out, they'll say, you know what, rather than having people handwrite stuff in, why don't we just include it as part of the contract? Or why don't we include an option to check a box? Okay, so you'll see them. That's where all these boxes come from. On the other side here, I want you to notice that it says California Residential Purchase Agreement and Joint Escrow Instructions. So what happens is that once this is approved by and accepted by the seller, this actually becomes the base document for the escrow instructions. So in other words, a copy of this goes to the escrow officer, and what the escrow officer is going to do is go through this document and is not going to give anybody any money until all of the conditions that are in this contract are met. That means that if there's a requirement for a termite inspection, that it's done, or an appraisal or whatever. They're going to make sure all those parts of the contract are fulfilled, unless both parties to the transaction come back and both of them mutually agree to not make that happen. For example, maybe the parties originally have agreed to the fact that the seller would fix any kind of termite damage that was found. And maybe after they do the termite inspection, they find out that maybe there's quite a bit of damage, and they agreed to the fact that, hey, you know what, we're going to split the fees. So in other words, it has to be where both parties communicate to the escrow officer in writing what they want changed. Okay? So anyway, going back to this. Also notice too, in this case, this is for use with a single-family residential property, okay? That's why you'll notice the writing in here is not, it's like an apartment purchase offer would have more stuff in it that would deal with that kind of a property. But anyway, I'm going to be emphasizing some things up here at the top. I want you to notice that a couple things are really important. As it starts up here at the top, and these are all numbered as they go down, this is the offer. You have to have a date on here, and you have to have where that document has been executed. In this case, it happens to be in Costa Mesa, California. The offer, this is an offer from and who the person is offering it. And so in other words, if it's a husband and wife or a partnership or whatever, it has to have their full names. Okay? And they're called the buyer. And then after that, it says the real property to be acquired as described. And notice what they've done here. They actually write down the address. So in other words, whatever the address is what you want to locate in here. The other thing that you're going to have here, so if the address goes longer than that, it's going to be, what county, state, zip code, whatever it is to identify the property. And then this is where your parcel number goes. This is the tax assessor's parcel number goes in here. Down below here, this is just telling you that it's what county it's in, what state it's in. The next paragraph down here is talking about the purchase price. And whenever we put the purchase price in here, we're going to write it out in hand like we used to in a check. Now, the reason we want to do that is because it's just like with a check. If we write a number down, there's always a chance somebody would have added an extra zero or a comma or a decimal point or something here. But if we write out the number, then that's a way to confirm that both numbers match. So in this case, they have a purchase price of $800,000. Okay, and then over here to the right, they also turn around and write that number out so that it's clear what it happens to be. Another term in here that's very, very important is when the close of escrow is going to happen. In other words, how long is this deal going to go on before they expect it to close? So it says the close of escrow shall occur, and it's either going to be a specific date here, okay, a specific date like May 19th or June 5th or whatever, or it's going to say 90 days after acceptance. So that essentially means that as soon as the offer is accepted, then from that point on the clock starts running, and there's an expectation that the transaction is going to be closed within 90 days. And that becomes very important. In fact, I was talking about that in my finance class today. You really want to be realistic with that. You want to think when you're putting that time frame down, how long is it going to take to get the financing, what kind of work may have to get done as far as repair work has to happen. All those things need to be considered before, when you're setting that date. Okay? Down below here is where you're listing the financing terms. Okay? You're talking about what the initial deposit's going to be. So I can have an initial deposit, and then I also need to tell where that deposit's going to be held. Who's going to be holding that deposit? Is it going to be the broker? Is it going to be an escrow company? Who's going to hold it? After that, they have something in here called the increase in deposit. This is one of the parts of this contract you may very well have where a buyer makes an offer, and the buyer takes and puts down, say, $5,000. And in fact, many times agents will do things where, in order to make sure that the buyer is solid, what they'll do is they'll say, okay, I'll take $5,000. And then once you do some activity, for example, once you get your appraisal, I'm going to ask you for some more money. Or once you get the termite report, I'm going to get some more money. And the whole idea is to make sure that the buyer is serious about the transaction. So you may very well, if there's a little bit of confusion in the beginning, maybe take a little bit less money, but the idea is, hey, once I as the seller have done whatever you have asked, I'm going to ask you to increase my deposit or increase your deposit to show good faith, if you will. The next thing that you're going to talk about in here is the loan amount. Very important part of the document because it's talking about the fact of what the conditions are that you're going to be looking at when you get a loan. So this is saying that this whole entire transaction is based on the fact of, or one of the major things of this transaction is based on the fact that this buyer can find a loan like this. So it's saying that the buyer is going to find a new first trust deed in the favor of the lender, encumbering the property and securing a note payable at a maximum rate of 8%. So if the buyer can't qualify for 8%, maybe they can only get a loan for 8.5% or 9%. That means that they can't qualify and they can't fulfill with the transaction. That's why you as a seller want to make sure that that's something that's going to work. And you're going to put here at a rate of 8% fixed or at a percent of initial, whatever the adjustable. So here you could have a fixed rate of 8%, and here you could have an adjustable rate because it's going to start out lower of maybe, say, 6% or 5%. With a maximum interest rate, and then here you're putting down what's the highest the rate's going to go. So on an adjustable rate mortgage, it starts out at, say, maybe 6%, and it could go as high as 10%. So again, this is up to the buyer finding that they can get a loan like this. Balance due in whatever number of years, amortized over how many years? Is it 10 years, 5 years, 30 years, whatever? Okay. The buyer shall pay loan fee points in the amount of 2. So again, this is another thing. We're setting out that the buyer is essentially saying, listen, if I get a loan, this is what I can afford. I can't go any higher than 8%. It's got to be a fixed rate. It's got to be for 30 years, and I can't afford any more than 2 points. If the buyer can't get something like that, then that can make the whole deal just go away. So that's why it's very, very important that when you accept this offer from a buyer that the seller knows that the buyer can actually get the loan. Very important. At least I think so. Down below, they're talking about other kinds of loans such as FHA, VA, so on and so forth. This is talking about the balance of the purchase price. All right. Some of the other things you'll see in here is verification of down payment and closing costs, that you have that money. Okay. Another thing that you'll run into is something called an appraisal contingency and removal. Again, the way I see this is the fact that you as a buyer, and especially buyers that are coming from outside of the local community, they may make an offer based on a price of a house. A good example would be somebody coming from Los Angeles to Sacramento. In Los Angeles, it could be quite conceivable that the house that they can buy down there could end up being like a 3-bedroom, 1 bath that they just sold for $700,000 or $800,000. They come up here and they see one of our houses that may be brand new, that's much bigger than the one that they sold, with a 3-car garage and 2 or 3 bathrooms in it, and it's $500,000. They may very well pay more for the house than the actual appraised value. So to me, this appraisal thing is sort of like a circuit breaker or a fuse, if you will, in the system. It's a way that you're going to get confirmation from the appraiser that, hey, you know what, this property is really worth what you're willing to pay for it. It's also going to confirm to the lender that it's worth it. And so what you're going to want to do here on this is a contingency. This means that, hey, if the property comes in at that value, that's fine. We can go forward. If not, that's going to end the transaction, because you're going to find out that your initial offer is for more than what the property is worth. Okay. The other thing you'll notice here too is that it says appraisal for contingency and removal. One of the things that you're going to want to do is that if you have any contingencies in a purchase offer, you're going to want to make sure that the buyer or the seller, whoever the contingency is based on, actually removes it, signs something off and says, I agree, this is it. I've reviewed the appraisal and I agree with it. You don't want to have where the transaction is going along and you think everything is cooking along real well, only to find out that then the buyer decides, no, the appraisal didn't come out to the way that I wanted it to. You want to, as soon as they get it, sign, agree, remove the contingency, go to the next one. Okay? At least in my opinion. So anyway, this down here talks about if you had an all-cash offer. This one talks about closing and occupancy. Another one that's very important is what's going to happen when to close and occupy the property. Turn the form over. Just going down here, this is talking about the allocation of costs. Let me see if I can get this allocation of costs. This part right here is talking about wood destroying and pest control. Who's going to do that? And you could either do it where the buyer is paying for it or the seller is paying for it. These people, by the way, are licensed. They're not people that, sometimes people turn around and say, well, I only feel confident if the buyer hires them. My recommendation is that if you are a seller of a house and you want your transaction to go well, what I did and do is to get the termite inspection done, and I pay for it and I get the work done. And the reason why is when I put the house out and advertise it for sale, I know that the house is going to pass that inspection. What I don't want to do is agree to take an offer and then all of a sudden find something that maybe is going to be a big job that I'm not going to have enough time to get it done within that time frame. I want to make sure that I have enough time, because you can live in a house for years and there may be something wrong with it that you don't know about, because those termite guys crawl all over that house. They're up on the roof, they're underneath the house, and they can find things that you maybe didn't know existed. So you really want to have that, and also too, so that you can negotiate who's going to fix it. Because you may want to go down and take a look at those costs and say, you know what, I can take care of this. The termite guy can fix that. So you can split the costs out. You want to have some time to think about it. Okay, then the other thing that they have down here is they have a whole list of different types of inspections and who's going to pay for them. And these go on and on and on. If there is an item in a house that can possibly go wrong, I'm sure we can find some inspector to do the inspection and determine whether it's working or not. But some of the more common ones are septic system. Does the septic system work correctly? And septic system can be, your sewer hookup, or specifically, Can also mean if you have a septic tank or anything like that, is it working correctly? Is the pipes clogged up? Whatever. You want to know that because that's a very costly item. If you have domestic wells tested, in other words, the water in the wells, can you drink it, or is it drinkable or not drinkable? Is it how many gallons per minute does the well put out? Does it put it? That becomes very important because what you don't want to do, especially in the outlying areas, a lot of people have private wells. That they've had to drill in the ground because there is no water company so that they work correctly. Yes or no? How many gallons per minute do they put out? Natural hazard zone disclosure. Seller shall pay for the following inspection report. If you have any of the following ones, seller shall pay for the following. So if you want the seller to pay for any of these, or buyer or seller, you check it off, which could be any kind of report inspection that you wanted. You name something, again, you can go wrong, they'll have it. This talks about government requirements to retrofit, shall pay for things like smoke detectors. There's a couple things in houses, especially older houses, that people don't have. You have to have a smoke detector, and by law, like in my particular house, I have them in every room. Okay, they all have to function, they all have to test, and they all have to work. And there's a lot of ways smoke detectors work. I mean, some of them are just totally battery operated. Some of them have batteries in charge. There's a lot of different ways that they function. Also, water tanks are another thing. You have to have them so that they can't tip over. They have to be strapped to the wall. If they're not, or it's something that a homeowner has done, guess what? You're going to have to put that strapping in there. And the reason why is, especially in California, where we're more susceptible to earthquakes, where it's not that the tank will fall over and flood the place. It's that the tank will fall over and sparks will be created if it's powered by electricity and set the place on fire, or it'll cause a gas leak and set the place on fire. In fact, one of the things I like to mention is a lot of times people will say, they'll talk about, they have a hurricane or they have some kind of a natural disaster, and a lot of homes are leveled. And what you'll notice is as soon as they get the power back on again, all of a sudden they start to have fires. And the reason why they have the fires is because when the power went off, the electricity went off. Now that you turn the electricity on, those bare wires now are arcing and sparking and maybe igniting gas and stuff like that. So that's the purpose of bracing those tanks so they will not cause further damage. Also the water part too. This down here talks about who's going to take care of the escrow and title. In this case, they're saying that they're going to split it 50-50. One thing I do want to say is that in some cases you're going to find out that that there'll be a custom where they'll say the seller pays the fees in this county or the buyer pays the fees, but it's negotiable. This is where you identify who the escrow company is going to be. This is just talking about the title insurance policy. Down below here is any other costs that are going to be covered, such as who's going to pay for the county transfer tax, the homeowners association fees, the homeowners association documents, all those kinds of things. Who's going to pay for those fees? Okay, and then this is talking here about statutory requirements for lead-based paint, okay, which we've talked about before. And again, this form keeps going on and on and on. A couple other things in here. Let me see. It just goes on. I'll just go through them as quickly as I can. This is talking about natural and environmental hazards here. This is called database disclosure. This has to do with, if you will, this has to do with the sexual offenders. If I can go over here right here. If you read this, this has to do, it says database disclosure pursuant to this section, information about specific registered sex offenders is made available to the public, and so it's telling you about that. In fact, we've had a lot of that in the newspaper recently. Okay. This is talking about condominium and plan unit development disclosures. So in other words, you're in a condominium project, or you're in your property is located in a homeowners association in which you need to let the people know that, hey, there's bylaws, there's budgets, there's fees, there's a lot of things you need to supply those documents and let them know about those, because those things can get to be a substantial part of your monthly payment and cost. This part here is talking about, which I think we talked about before, which is conditions affecting the property. This is all talking about those disclosures that you have to make. In other words, I think we covered that during the listing part of the agreement, if I remember correctly. But these are the disclosures. In other words, what does the property have? Does it have a stove, an oven? Does it have a dishwasher? Those kinds of things. And then do they work or not work? All those disclosures are important. That's what we're talking about in that case. This part here is talking about any items that are going to be included or excluded in the sale. So if you have something that you want to not sell with the property, you want to take with you, or that you want to make sure is with the property, this is where that's spelled out. This part is talking about a buyer's investigation or inspection of the property. That's what this paragraph is about, where you can hire somebody to come in and take a look at the property and see what conditions it is to find out whether you want to buy it or not. Okay, and mainly because of the fact that a lot of people nowadays cannot fix stuff. They don't know how to fix stuff. They don't know how to take care, they don't know how to repair things, and things have become very expensive. And so anyway, what they want to do is have somebody come in, take a look at the property and see if there's anything that's major that needs to be fixed before they buy it. Okay. Going down from here, this talks about this talks about repairs. This talks about this right here is talking about title investing, talking about how you're going to take title to the property. This is sale of the buyer's property. So in other words, if your agreement is contingent upon the buyer selling their property before this can take place, then they're going to list this here. So they'll say this agreement is not contingent upon the sale of the property owned by the buyer. These things will run hot and cold. What will happen is if you have a market that is really hot, in other words, where people are just dying to buy property, you usually will find out that the people that are making the offers may actually even take the chance and say, you know what, don't worry about it. I'm pretty confident I'll sell my house before I need to close on this one. Or as today, where they're saying, you know what, my house has been on the market for a while. I don't know when it's going to be sold. I'm not going to go forward on this deal until I know I have that house sold first. Okay, and the seller is going to be willing to accept that because maybe they've never had, if you will, they haven't had any offer, and you're the first offer to come along, so they'll take it. This just talks about time periods for the removal of contingencies and cancellation rights and how much time you have. Okay, that's what's in this part right here. Again, I'm just very quickly going over these. Keep in mind that you and your client have to go over all of this stuff, when you're getting ready to make the offer. This is talking about how you're going to handle things like dispute resolutions. So in other words, if you do have a dispute, how you're going to handle it. The direction that everybody wants to take today is we want to do everything we can possibly do to not go to court. Let's try to be adults about this. The minute we go to court, we have court fees, we have delays, we have costs, we have to hire attorneys. So you know what, if we have a disagreement about this, first of all, let's start out by disclosing everything. Let's not keep anything hidden. Let's just be open and honest about it. But if we do have something, let's have some way that we get together and try to resolve this without getting a lot of other people involved. The minute we start saying that we're going to sue somebody, the costs go up for both sides. And I think in most cases, the only people that win, I hate to say this, are the attorneys. The parties don't win. So if you're open and honest and truthful and disclose and work together, and if you do have a problem, try to mediate it and take care of it, the better off you are. Okay. Again, this is talking about prorations here. How are we going to handle things such as taxes? Taxes that may be paid, homeowners association dues. How are we going to handle all that? How are we going to handle the proration of, how are we going to assign when the buyer starts paying those things and when the seller stops? That's a proration. So how are we going to handle that? This is just disclosing here that this property is talking about being in the multiple listing service. And again, down here, the last part is just talking about definitions that are utilized within the contract itself. So the whole concept behind this is that if you see something and you don't necessarily know what it is, hopefully you can get to the back here and look up the definition. It'll hopefully will help explain what it is. The problem with a lot of times when people give definitions, what they do is they use a definition to explain, or they use the word itself in part of the definition, and they don't do it. So anyway, that's pretty much the final page in here. And just to let you know, if you go to work for a real estate company, they are probably going to have a class in which you are going to be spending anywhere from 4 to 8 hours just going over this contract. Just this contract alone. Then you're going to have another 4 to 8 hours where you're going to go over the listing agreement. So I am so quickly brushing over these topical areas. It's incredible. I mean, you're going to have where your real estate broker is going to be spending a lot of time talking about a specific paragraph and talking about all the do's and the don'ts and all the laws that are involving that and how you should handle that and when you should call them. They're all covering that stuff. So very, very important. In fact, they're not even going to allow you on your own to write these offers without total guidance under their control. They're going to want to review, read, and make sure there's no mistakes in these. So there's a lot of emphasis placed on these contracts because, as I've said in other classes, what you don't want to do is be standing there one day and saying, Your Honor, I meant to check the box, I'm sorry. Or I meant to put this in, but I forgot. And they'll say, well, that sounds pretty good to me, but that's going to cost you and the client $20,000. These contracts are serious. So that's why your broker is going to want to make sure you fill these out correctly. This part back here just talks about the expiration of the offer, when it will expire, because you're not going to put this offer out there and let people think about it for the next 5 years. So when does it expire? Typically, they're usually good for maybe 48, 72 hours. The idea is that you want to give people enough time to think about it and consider it, but you want to get back with them because you want to know, are they going to sell me the house, yes or no? If not, I'm going to move on to the next house. Okay? This is the date and the time, and you're just signing off everything down the bottom here. Okay? This is where the seller signs. Okay? And then this is where your real estate brokers sign. So everybody's signing this last document that they read, understand, totally go along with everything that's going on here. Okay, again, I cannot overemphasize enough on how our real estate brokers spend a tremendous amount of time going over that contract with all their new agents. Very, very, very important that you do that. I know the Sacramento Association of Realtors has a program called the READY program that lasts, I think it's 10 weeks, in which every Friday they have a person come in and talk about specific areas of real estate. And one of the things they focus a lot of attention on is these contracts. Okay, this is just to show you a purchase addendum agreement. Okay, again, this is by the California Association of Realtors. This is a purchase addendum agreement. Again, an addendum agreement is basically what happens is that these happen to be things that are coming up that instead of having you handwrite stuff in there, these are things that you can add to that by filling out small little boxes or checking things. So anyway, you'll go through here. I'm just trying to find things in here. Just talking about different things that would be an addendum to the original contract. Okay, you'll find out that they do this on a regular basis. What you see here are only 2 of the contracts. There's lots and lots of contracts that they have. For example, in this case here, it's like, for example, if a tenant is going to remain in possession of the property, like if you're selling a rental piece of property, they'll talk about that, okay, where you have a single-family home and it's being rented out. Okay, so anyway, all of this stuff is listed in here, and we could go on for hours about that, but that's just an addendum to the agreement. The next document they show you in here is something called a counter offer. A counter offer. A counter offer means that, and And it tells you again, this is California Association of Realtors. If I zoom back up here again, this is where you number the counteroffer, and it says for use by seller or buyer. Okay? And what this is basically doing is that you receive an offer on a piece of property, and what you want to do is you maybe are going along with what that's saying, but you want to counter back. You know, it could be based on price, it could be based on terms, it could be based on something. So this is a pre-written document that's talking about what you would counter offer back again on. So again, this is the date, the time. It's in California. This is a counter offer to the California Residential Purchase Agreement, where it is, okay, terms, the terms and conditions of the above referenced document are acceptable subject to the following, and then what you're doing is you're listing all that stuff down here. Okay? So again, this is another one of the documents that you will have to basically deal with, one of the other contracts that you'll have to deal with. And I think, okay, so that's that one. The next one that they have in here that's important is something called a Buyer's Inspection Advisory. And we covered this sort of when we were talking about those disclosure statements. And what we're really trying to do is to inform the buyer that, you know, especially in the disclosure statements, we're trying to inform the buyer that we are doing everything honestly and truthful and above board, everything we can to tell you what the house has, what the conditions are, whether things work or don't work. But what we're also trying to do here at this point is to say, you know what, you have the right to get somebody to come out and do the inspection. You know, you may not feel comfortable with what we're doing, or you may not feel comfortable with certain kinds of things, or maybe it's a house that's used and you want to know, you know, do things work correctly in it? And so you want to have a home inspector that's going to come out and take a look at the plumbing system, the electrical system. They're going to look if it has a chimney, is the chimney cracked? They're going to look at all those things and then come back with a report and say what needs to be corrected, or is you know, what needs to be corrected immediately, or maybe what is something maybe needs to be done in the future, whatever. So it'll be this disclosure, but you're telling the buyer what their rights are here. So you're talking about the importance of the property investigation. You're talking about the buyer's rights and their duties. You're talking about the seller's rights and their duties. Broker's obligations, okay, are all listed in this report, okay? And I could have a war story to probably go with every one of those paragraphs, but again, this is just a buyer's advisory contract is what it really is, okay? And finally, on the other side down here, it just continues to go down. You know, all the different things that you would want to consider, everything from soils to building permits, on and on and on, neighborhood subdivision. And then finally down the bottom, what's happening is the buyer is signing it and the seller is signing it. Okay? Very, very important document. All right. Next, so we already talked about the disclosures. Okay. Okay. The next thing that I wanted to talk, because we only have a few more minutes to go, is what we call is purchase options. And let me see how this goes. Okay, purchase options. So let me zoom this in for a minute and talk about what this is. An option, by the way, an option is where you have a choice. You can either do something or not do something. Okay, that's an option in real world. Okay, an option is a unilateral contract. What that essentially means is that I have a choice whether I want to exercise the option or not exercise the option. I use options for many different reasons. I may have, for example, where maybe I may rent a house for a period of time. I may be moving to the community. I may really like, say, Sacramento. I would really like to live here. I think the house that I'm going to rent is the house that I would really like to eventually buy, but I'm not really sure. Or maybe my house hasn't sold in another area, or I'm not sure how long my job's going to last. But I'd like to have a chance that maybe down the road that I could go ahead and maybe buy the house if I want to. So what I would maybe do is rent the house with an option to buy. And maybe I'd have an agreement with the owner of the property to say, you know what, how about, I know you want to get $1,500 a month. How about if I give you $1,600 a month? So that's some extra money for you. And if you give me the chance to buy it in the next 2 years, that would be an option. And maybe I would say that extra $100, if I exercise the option, is going to go ahead and apply as down payment for the house, as an example. If at the end of 2 years, I decide that, hey, you know what, I don't want to live here, I found a better house, or I decide to build a house, I can just say, well, I decided not to exercise the option. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and let the seller keep that money, and I'm going to move into the new, another house. That's fine, it's an option. But anyway, it says an option is the right to purchase a property upon specific terms within a specific period of time, which is granted in exchange for money. An option is normally purchased to take possession of property, or take property off the open market. The prospective purchaser holds an exclusive right to buy during an option period. I have also heard of where people, for example, in the commercial property area or in the land development area, may say to somebody like, some place where they think they might be able to do a subdivision, and say, you know what, there's a farmer right now, he's got his cows on the property. In order for me to actually find out whether I can develop this or not, I'm going to have some land surveyors come in, I'm going to have some engineering done. So why don't I do this? Let the farmer keep his cows on the property. I'll pay him an option that'll give me the right, that's the agreement, to go ahead and pursue this. And then if I cannot get it approved for a subdivision, then what I've lost is the option money, but I haven't been stuck with a piece of property I can't develop. That might be another example of somebody who'll do that. So down below here on the other side, they talk about what the option is. This is an option agreement. Again, you have the date and the time, what the option consideration is. In other words, how much money are you actually putting up? Okay. If you're going to lease it, it's checked here. What the option period of time happens to be. How long is that for? Is it for a day, a week, a month, a year, 2 years? How long is it for? How are you going to exercise the option? In other words, how are you going to, when you do it, what are you going to do? Are you going to buy it? What are you going to do? Anyway, so this goes through all of those particular details of the option agreement. Again, this is something that you probably want to take and read and become familiar with it, especially if you're talking about leasing a property with an option to buy or renting with an option to buy. You may very well find that especially now, where, for example, maybe houses are sitting on the market for a long period of time, the owner's having a difficult time selling the property. Maybe they've had no offers. What they do is they decide that they want to go ahead and rent, they're forced to rent the property. So if they're a seller and they're looking to get somebody in there that might be a serious potential buyer in the future, they may actually want to turn around and say, you know what, I'll turn around and I will rent you the property or lease you the property with an option to buy, okay, that you can exercise that option in the next year or 2 years. The advantage to that, if they get a buyer like that, is the buyer has some form of, if you will, interest in trying to keep the property up. You're getting a more serious person. In fact, you may even actually be able to get more rent out of it by giving them, saying, if you pay me some extra money, I'll give you the option for the next 2 years to buy the property. And then that way you say to yourself, okay, well, I've got somebody in there that's going to take care of it. I really don't have to worry about it. And I'm in a better state if I just rent it out to anyone. Now, the advantage to that is that you, as a seller, may very well get somebody to move in there and take care of the property. The advantage to the buyer, which is maybe a big advantage, is the fact that the buyer is able to move in, possibly be able to hold on or have the option to buy that house for maybe just the rental amount or maybe a little bit more if the property goes up in value. Say, for example, we're at, as we talk about, the bottom of the curve. In other words, the properties are sort of bottomed out and now they're going to start going up. When they start going up, you may find out that maybe that house has been sitting on the market for a long period of time and hasn't moved. And then all of a sudden, when the demand starts heating up for it, that house can go up substantially in a short period of time. So you may look, as the buyer or the person renting, you may look very smart. In a year, your house may go up $25,000 or $30,000 because that's the direction the market's going. If that happens, you have really had a lot of major leverage. In other words, you've put a small amount of money down and you've been able to tie up a property and earn a lot of equity in a short period of time. So that can be your advantage to it. Okay, in other words, you can make some, if you hit it right, you can make some decent income, if you will, out of it, or decent investment, if you will, if the market's going in the right direction. So anyway, I'm taking a look to see whatever else that we have in here. I think I'm pretty much at the end of the chapter for contracts. A couple things that I want to mention to you is to remember that, going back here, remember that whenever you are getting involved in a contract with a client, make sure that that person can enter into the contract. Make sure that they're old enough. Make sure that in other words, they're of age. Make sure that they have the mental capacity to enter into the contract. If you think that somebody maybe does not have that, you want to make sure, if you suspect that at all, I think the best thing to do is to say, talk to your broker. That's why we pay them some kind of a fee. Get that kind of advice. You also want to remember that in a contract, it has to be legal to be enforced in court of law. Remember that it has to have mutual consent of both parties. A contract has to have both people agree to the terms. And also remember that you have to have some form of consideration. And that consideration can either be money, it can be money, it can be something else like a car, it can be notes, deeds of trust, it can be other kinds of financial instruments that you're using for consideration, or it can even be a promise to either do something or not do something. The other thing that I want to do is remember that what becomes important too is the fact that remember that under the statute of frauds is the one that really dictates that just about all real estate contracts, to the best of my knowledge, have to be in writing. And the reason for that is we're trying to make sure that if something does go wrong, we can go back and take a look at that original contract and say to the person, no, you promised that you were going to pay this amount of money. Or you promised that I could move in on this date. So you have some way to have written down what those things are so that you can later on, if necessary, go back and enforce them. Okay? Say to the person, you promised you were going to fix the roof. You didn't do that. Okay? You promised you were going to pay the escrow fees and you didn't. Remember also the fact that the agreement we talked about a purchase offer. Remember, I spent quite a bit of time going over it, but I said to you also that a purchase offer is something that you're going to find out your real estate broker is going to have you go over in great detail. They contain a tremendous amount of, if you will, to me a purchase offer is where I'm promising to buy something, but I have a set of rules or contingencies. It's all contingent on things. Contingent on me getting the financing, contingent on me getting an appraisal. It's contingent on a lot of things. So it is important that you understand what they are, what the rules are, how the law affects it, and have it so that you can explain it to your client. Very, very important. Very, very important. So you don't want to have any misunderstandings on the client's part later on, like I didn't understand, I didn't agree to that. And so that becomes very important. And then the last thing that we talked about a couple other things. We talked about counteroffers. And we also talked about option agreements. Again, this is a very important chapter, and I think you really should take the time to go over this because this is where you're going to get yourself in trouble if you don't do it correctly. So with that, I want to thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you back here again for the next show. Have a nice day.